Samantha B. believed she had the upper hand, until Stallone responded with a remark so piercing, so effortlessly disarming, that the clip took off online before the night was even over. Stay with us until the end to hear what unfolded. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story. It started like any other midweek taping at the El Capitan Theater, nestled beneath the bright glow of Hollywood Boulevard's neon light. The audience was comfortably settled in their seats. The crew glided through final preparations. Backstage, makeup artists dabbing foreheads, stagehands fine-tuning the set, producers murmuring directions through headsets, and cue cards being adjusted for lighting. The atmosphere was routine. Nothing in the air hinted at the storm to come. Sylvester Stallone stepped out of his car and into the back entrance precisely on time. Not fashionably early, not running behind, right on the dot. He wore a charcoal sport jacket over a crisp black shirt, his gait relaxed, his manner unfazed. This wasn't new territory for him. Stallone had been walking into green rooms and onto stages long before some of tonight's crew even knew how to spell his name. The plan was simple: promote the second season of Tulsa King, trade a few laughs with the host, sprinkle in a story from the set, and call it a night. Publicists would handle the aftermath, as they always did. But something lingered in the air, a tension that had been trailing him for days. It wasn't the show or the host, or even the topic of conversation. It was a sentence, a stray remark that had caught fire. In an earlier interview with the Palm Beach Post, Stallone had made an off-script observation about leadership, detouring into politics in a way that was as unexpected as it was candid. He'd likened Donald Trump to a wrecking ball, not exactly flattering, but not entirely critical either. Sometimes, Stallone had said, you need a force that is destructive to clear the rubble. Predictably, the comment took on a life of its own. Online reactions were fierce and divided, but Stallone didn't feed the frenzy. No retractions, no further comments, just silence. And in today's climate, silence is a drumbeat inviting confrontation. That confrontation came in the form of Samantha B., known for her sharp wit and political jabs. Unlike some of her late-night peers, Samantha often walked the tightrope between satire and provocation, especially with guests who had dipped their toes into political waters. Stallone, with his decades-long career and recent remarks, was prime material. Her writers must have sensed blood in the water. The setup was too perfect. Backstage, Stallone shared a quiet exchange with a hairstylist, chuckling softly as a bottle of water rested half-finished on the counter. To the casual observer, he seemed at ease, his posture casual, his tone light. But a closer look told a different story. His laughter never quite touched his eyes. He wasn't uneasy, he was simply alert. There's a quiet difference between being rattled and being ready. As the show kicked off, Samantha moved briskly through her monologue. She skewered billionaires, commented wryly on celebrity breakups, and riffed on recent tech news. Then came the pivot. With a teasing smile and impeccable timing, she turned to the camera. My next guest once punched his way through the Cold War, made sweatbands fashionable, and now, apparently, thinks Donald Trump is a misunderstood founding father. Please welcome Sylvester Stallone. A ripple of laughter ran through the audience, but a few reactions were more tentative. Stallone emerged from the wings with a practiced smile, giving a casual wave as he approached. He shook Samantha's hand, firm but genial, and lowered himself into the guest chair. Before the usual pleasantries could begin, Samantha leaned in slightly, mischief in her expression. So, Trump, huh? She said with a theatrical lift of her eyebrow. Did Rocky finally take one too many blows to the head? The studio laughed, a few clapped, though some paused, unsure. The air shifted. Stallone didn't blink. He looked at her, still and composed. There was no hint of offense, no flicker of irritation. Instead, there was something older in his gaze, measured, patient, like a man who'd seen this scene before but was curious how it would end this time. He tilted his head, lips curling into a slow smile, not sharp, but deliberate. The evening had been rolling along with the usual blend of polished banter and harmless jabs, until Samantha B. leaned in, that trademark grin curling at the edge of her lips, and said with a twinkle in her eye, "Yeah, maybe. But at least I wasn't the one who got slapped on Oscar night and just stood there." Her timing was perfect. The audience let out a collective gasp, but it wasn't discomfort that filled the space. It was anticipation, thick and crackling like the air before a storm. And then came the thunder. Sylvester Stallone didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back slowly in his seat, a faint glimmer of something unreadable in his eyes. Then, just as the tension threatened to break, he spoke. Not loudly, not with showmanship. He just spoke. "Well," he began, his voice slow and textured like worn leather. "The difference is, I've been taking hits for decades, on screen and off, and I always get back up." It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. The crowd responded with a roar of laughter, but there was more behind it this time. Not just amusement, but admiration. The laughter rolled through the studio like a wave, carrying with it the feeling that something unfiltered, something honest, had just happened. Samantha, usually sharp and unshakable, blinked. For a beat, her practiced composure slipped. "Well then," she said, chuckling but slightly off balance, "I guess we're doing this." Stallone gave no chase. He let the silence stretch a moment longer, comfortable in the pause. Then he leaned forward, elbows on knees, meeting her gaze. "You know, Samantha," he said, measured and even, "I've been in this business long enough to know that everyone's got something to say. But lately it feels like all we're doing is taking swings. No one's standing for anything anymore." His voice carried a quiet weight, the kind that silences rooms. The crew backstage had stilled. Even the camera operators, used to the rhythm of celebrity interviews, were holding their breath. Samantha raised her hands slightly, signaling she was still in on the joke. "Hey, come on. I was just playing around." Stallone nodded slowly. "I know," he said, "but maybe that's just it. Everything's play. Everything's safe. Say something from the gut, and suddenly people shift in their seats." He wasn't attacking her. He wasn't grandstanding. He was speaking directly to the folks watching at home, those who had grown up with him, who knew the characters he played. Flawed men who bled, who failed, but who never stopped trying. "I'm not trying to be some kind of moral compass," he continued, eyes scanning the studio lights. "But for 50 years, I've written and portrayed men who believed in something. Loyalty, grit, honor. They weren't saints, neither am I. But every time I tried to make them count, applause broke out, and this time it wasn't just polite, it was heartfelt. From the audience, yes, but also from the wings, grips, stagehands, lighting techs. People who had seen 1,000 interviews, but rarely this kind of raw sincerity. Samantha tried to pivot. Okay, let's not turn this into a motivational seminar," she said with a laugh that was a little too quick. Stallone turned toward her, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, not mocking, just firm. "Don't worry, Sam. Those seminars are for people who rehearse what they believe. Me? I'm just talking." Another ripple of laughter swept through the room, not because it was funny, but because it struck a chord. There was no script here, no teleprompter wisdom, just a man, still standing, still swinging. Samantha, sensing she was no longer steering the conversation, reached for safer ground. "Let's talk about Tulsa King, shall we? You're doing some pretty intense stuff on that show, especially for a man of your experience." Stallone raised an eyebrow, feigning mild offense. "You mean for a 77-year-old who's still more limber than your writing staff?" The audience lost it again. Laughter rippled through the studio like a well-timed drum roll, one that built naturally, not from a cue card but from genuine amusement. Another quip had landed with pinpoint precision, witty, sharp, and clean. Samantha B. grinned, shaking her head in mock defeat. "Well, I walked right into that one." "You sure did," Stallone replied with a chuckle, lifting a hand in a gesture that was half point, half salute. "But hey, you're not the first. Happens all the time." There was an ease to the exchange, the kind of rhythm that felt like jazz, spontaneous, smooth, but always deliberate. Stallone wasn't jabbing with fists now. His punches came into the form of words, delivered with the same quiet confidence he brought to the ring on screen. He shifted slightly in his chair, fingers curling around a glass of water, and after a long sip, leaned back with a calm resolve that said he was just getting started. "You can joke about Rocky all you want," he continued, voice steady but charged with something deeper. "But Rocky didn't quit. That's the difference. That's why people still care." The applause that followed was no studio setup. No lights blinked above the audience. It just happened, spontaneous and honest, as if every person in the room had suddenly remembered what heart sounds like. But Stallone wasn't basking in it. He wasn't done. In fact, the tone had shifted entirely. What began as light banter was morphing into something weightier, something that asked you to sit up and really listen. Samantha sensed it too. She lowered her note card slightly. Her smile faded into attentiveness. This wasn't a routine interview anymore. It was something closer to a front porch conversation, the kind that makes you forget there are cameras at all. "You know what gets me?" Stallone said, rolling his shoulders as if shedding a weight. "Everyone's hunting for something to believe in, but nobody wants to say it out loud first. That's the problem." Samantha raised an eyebrow. "So are you saying you're the one who's supposed to speak up?" "Not supposed to," he answered with a small shrug. "Just seems to be what I do. I didn't have much growing up. No money, no favors coming my way. But I had something. Didn't even know what to call it back then. Took me years to figure out how to use it." There wasn't a trace of self-pity in his voice, just a kind of quiet reckoning. "I wrote Rocky at a coffee table in a tiny apartment with a dog I could barely afford to feed. That script got turned down more times than I can count. They offered to buy it, sure, but they didn't want me. They wanted someone easier on the eyes, someone polished. I said no, because if I'm going to attach my name to something, I've got to believe in it, even if no one else does." A hush fell over the room. Even the usual rustling in the audience had gone still. Samantha sat silently, her eyes fixed on him. Stallone gave a faint smile, scanning the crowd with a look that was both protective and proud. "I've seen this industry eat people alive for less. Good people. Talented actors who didn't know the rules, who didn't smile at the right time, didn't shake the right hands. Now it's all about who you tag, who you unfollow, who you quote, who you retweet." His eyes returned to Samantha. "So, yeah, I said something about Trump. It wasn't a game, wasn't a headline grab, just a thought. One man's thoughts. People lost it. But when people go wild over words, that says a whole lot more about them than it does about me." This time, the applause didn't just rise. It surged. No prompting, no sign. Just a wave of something real, something earned. Samantha cleared her throat gently, her voice softened. "You've always had grit, haven't you? You think that's what kept you going in this town?" Stallone nodded slowly. "Grit, and knowing when to tune people out, especially the ones who act like they've got it all figured out. You survive in this business by learning when to speak and when to stay silent. And when do you speak? You make it count." He leaned forward again, elbows on his knees, his gaze steady. The cameras may have been rolling, but the moment belongs entirely to him. "You don't have to nod along with everything I say," he continued, his tone now lower, more personal, "but you can feel when I mean it. And that," he gave a soft shrug, "that's not something you come across too often in this business." Across from him, Samantha B. didn't reply with a quip or clever retort. Instead, she simply gave a thoughtful nod, her usual comedic timing replaced by a quiet attentiveness. The air had shifted. The bright studio lights, the carefully arranged cameras, even the laughter signs seemed to fade into the background. At that moment, she wasn't a host. She was a listener. Someone in the front row, a woman, maybe mid-30s, started clapping, softly at first. Then another joined. Within moments, A warm ripple of applause spread through the studio. Stallone offered a modest wave and leaned back in his chair with the easy posture of a man who had said exactly what he wanted to say. Samantha gave a small smile, glancing at her notes before gently nudging the conversation forward. "All right," she said with a careful lift in her voice. "Let's shift gears a little. I want to hear about the new season of Tulsa King." She was doing her job, guiding the segment, but anyone watching could tell the emotional high point had already passed. Still, in an effort to recapture the room's rhythm, she added with a mischievous grin, "Tell me, Sly, ever considered a political run? I mean, with talk like that, you've got half of America ready to check your name on a ballot." Her tone was light, playful, a return to the familiar beats of late-night television. But Stallone didn't jump to answer. He turned his head slightly, as if weighing her words on an internal scale, measuring just how much of himself he was willing to offer up again. Then, deadpan and without a flicker of a smile, he replied, "Only if I get to debate you first." The crowd broke into laughter, this time more relaxed, more appreciative. Even Samantha leaned back, laughing aloud and clapping her hands once. "Fair," she said with a chuckle, shaking her head. But Stallone's eyes didn't chase the laugh. He stayed right where the real conversation had left him. "People always say I'd be good at politics," he said, voice mellowing. "Maybe. But if I had to choose, I'd rather act the part than live it. At least in a movie, I wouldn't have to lie." The reaction this time was a mix, some laughter, a few scattered claps, but mostly quiet acknowledgement. Stallone wasn't performing. He was simply speaking his truth. Leaning forward a bit, Samantha asked, her tone now tinged with genuine curiosity, "Do you ever think being this open could hurt your career? I mean, it's a different world out there now." Stallone met her eyes without flinching. "Samantha, I'm 77. You really think I'm worried about losing points on the scoreboard?" A slight smile played on his lips. "I've done the work. I've told my stories. If someone pulls a deal because of what I believe, maybe that deal didn't deserve me in the first place." The audience shifted in their seats, a ripple of emotion moving through the studio. Sylvester Stallone hadn't come to make headlines or provoke controversy. He spoke from a place that felt raw, even tender, and that's what struck a nerve. As he leaned slightly forward in his chair, his voice lowered, not for drama, but for sincerity. "There comes a time," he said, "when all the trophies and lights and walk-ins on the red carpet, they stop meaning something if you've lost your voice in the process." He let the words settle before continuing. "People don't speak up, not because they don't care, but because they're scared. Scared of saying the wrong thing. Scared of being the only one who thinks differently. But silence doesn't change the world." Across from him, Samantha B., sitting in her tailored blue blazer, absorbed the moment. Her expression softened, her hands clasped lightly in her lap. "So what do we take from that?" she asked gently. "That we should stop worrying about offending others?" Stallone chuckled, not dismissively, but like a man who'd thought about this a long time. "No," he replied. "It's not about upsetting people. That just happens when you start living true. The point is, don't be afraid to be real, to be yourself. That's where the strength is." A rumble of laughter spread through the audience again, but it wasn't the kind prompted by punchlines. It was the kind that comes when something resonates deep down. Applause followed, not thunderous, but meaningful. In the control booth, producers watched as real-time numbers rolled in, likes, shares, comments. Clips of Stallone's remarks were already popping up across every platform: TikTok, YouTube, X, Facebook, framed by bold captions, translated into multiple languages, set to background music. Comments poured in. Finally, someone in Hollywood who speaks with guts. "Sly just said what we all feel." Backstage, two junior producers huddled in the hallway near the green room. One leaned in, whispering, "We've never seen engagement move this fast." Phones buzzed non-stop. The interview wasn't just going viral, it was becoming something larger, a cultural checkpoint. On the stage, the applause faded into a kind of respectful quiet. Stallone took a breath, then added one final thought, the glint in his eye still playful. You know, there's a reason Rocky never ran for office. He wasn't chasing power. He was just trying to make a difference. That's what matters. A hush fell over the studio. Not empty silence, but a quiet charge of thought. People were reflecting, some even blinking faster than usual. Samantha didn't jump in with a clever line or scripted close. She just nodded, genuinely, slowly. It wasn't a host reacting to a segment. It was a person acknowledging another. "You're not the usual kind of guest, Sly," she finally said. He grinned, leaning back in his chair. "Yeah," he said. "I come with a message and a left hook." Later that night, as Stallone walked out under the soft glow of the exit sign, the internet was already framing the conversation as a moment that mattered. The now famous Oscar slap comment had evolved into its own meme category. The "debate you first" line had been remixed into a trending audio, fueling hours of back and forth between fans and critics. But more than the buzz, there was an unmistakable tone in people's reactions, something close to reverence. Whether they sided with Stallone or not, they saw him for what he was that night, composed, grounded, and driven by purpose. There was no yelling, no mugging for the camera, no frantic need to please, just a man who said his piece, clearly and calmly, and let it stand. The headlines spread like wildfire. Variety led with, "Stallone shuts down Samantha Bee with poise and precision." Deadline called it a rare and refreshing moment in late-night television. Even media outlets known for steering clear of political undercurrents found themselves covering the segment. But the real buzz wasn't about ideology. It wasn't about party lines. It was about presence. That was the word that kept surfacing across social media feeds and front porch conversations. Not "Stallone embarrassed Bee" or "Sly delivers a knockout." No, what lingered was something quieter and far more compelling. It was how he carried himself. People started sharing their favorite part of the exchange online. Was it the line about the Oscars? Or maybe just the look on Bee's face when she realized he wasn't rattled? In a Nashville diner, a morning radio host kicked off his broadcast breaking down the moment frame by frame. In a Sacramento barbershop where the TV's always tuned to cable news, they played the clip over and over, even when no customers were waiting. In a modest community center outside Phoenix, two retired Marines chatted over coffee and shook their heads, one of them saying, "He still shows up for the fight, just not with gloves anymore." Naturally, the segment stirred controversy. Some political commentators pounced, painting Stallone as out of place or outdated. Other late-night hosts threw in barbed comments, accusing him of stirring the pot. But none of it really stuck. Those critiques were lost in the tide of something larger. People weren't siding with him because they endorsed everything he said. They rallied around how he said it. There was no flurry of clarifications from publicists, no damage control behind the scenes. He didn't hit back on social media. He didn't need to. The silence after the moment said more than any tweet ever could. He wasn't trying to provoke. He wasn't delivering a manifesto. He just spoke plainly, from the gut, and let the words land where they would. And they landed hard. The ripple effect moved swiftly through the industry. Within 72 hours, producers from unlikely corners were reaching out to Stallone's team. Not because he'd stirred outrage, but because he'd reminded them what it looks like when someone speaks without fear. In Los Angeles, tucked inside a family-run Italian spot near Melrose, Stallone sat at a corner table with two longtime friends, the kind who remembered the lean years before fame. A young server came over, grinning. "Are you the guy who shut down Samantha Bee?" she asked, barely containing her excitement. Stallone chuckled softly, not missing a beat. "I didn't shut her down," he said. "I just didn't play along." He didn't say it with arrogance, just clarity. The conversation moved on, but the moment stayed in the air like smoke. Meanwhile, in Scottsdale, a talent agent sipped espresso with a fledgling actor. "You want to understand what real presence looks like?" he said, pulling out his phone. "Watch Stallone with Samantha. That's how you hold a room without saying too much." Because what captured everyone, what made the segment resonate across generations, wasn't the cleverness of the comeback or even the content of the conversation. It was the restraint. In a culture saturated with noise, with shouting and spectacle, Stallone offered something almost radical, a stillness that spoke volumes, and that, more than any single sentence he uttered, was what people kept returning to. A moment of grace under pressure. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful move you can make is to stand your ground quietly, look someone in the eye, and choose not to perform. Not for applause, not for approval, just for the truth. People weren't just laughing when they watched that video. They were rewinding it to feel something rare, something true. It stirred up a sense of calm strength, the kind that cuts through all the noise. Sylvester Stallone, sitting there in front of Samantha B., didn't raise his voice. He didn't get pulled into the circus. Instead, he let a deeper current do the talking, steady, self-assured, and untouched by the swirl of outrage culture. It wasn't really about politics, and it certainly wasn't about B. What struck a chord was that here was a man who, without flinching, finally said what so many have wanted to say. And he did it without a trace of bitterness or bravado. That's what made people stop and listen. Behind the cameras, the production crew knew something different had just happened. Samantha, sharp-witted as always, had leaned in slightly during the exchange, picking up on the shift in energy. There was a moment just after Stallone finished speaking when you could have heard a pin drop. No punchline, no clever retort, just silence, and something powerful settling into the room. It felt like still water after a storm. On a Reddit thread later that night, one user wrote, "He didn't sound like someone trying to go viral. He sounded like a man who's lived enough life to not need anyone's permission to speak plainly." That sentiment echoed across Facebook, in family group texts, and even in a diner outside Des Moines, where a waitress paused mid-order to say, "You know, that's the kind of voice you trust. No show, no spin." Character. That was the word on everyone's lips. Not flash, not charm, just character. It's a word that's gone a bit out of fashion in the entertainment world. It doesn't trend. It doesn't sell merchandise. But Stallone made it feel real again, without even naming it. He didn't posture. He didn't pivot to a polished soundbite. Instead, he simply said, "I'm not trying to be right. I'm just trying to be real." And that landed harder than any scripted monologue ever could. It was the weight of lived experience, not performance. The kind of energy that comes from a man who's taken some bruises and doesn't need a standing ovation to know where he stands. A truck driver outside of Tulsa, scrolling through his phone by the gas pump, watched the clip with a kind of quiet respect. "That's the sound of someone who's not afraid to lose," he said softly, mostly to himself. In Ohio, a retired high school teacher shared the video with her book club. "I don't follow politics," she said. But that was something else. That was the backbone. That was the character. Over in Colorado, a debate coach played the video for her students. Not to make a point about current events, but to teach them what grace under pressure really looks like. She pointed out the way Stallone kept his tone even, his shoulders relaxed, his eyes direct. "This," she told them, "is how you hold steady when everything's trying to shake you." And maybe that's what people responded to most. Not what was said, but how it was said. In a time when every opinion seems wrapped in outrage or applause, there was something refreshingly grounded in his restraint. He wasn't performing. He wasn't pretending. He was just standing his ground with the quiet assurance of someone who's already faced the fire and come through it. In today's world, that's not just rare, that's unforgettable. And that lesson, especially in these chaotic times, felt more important than ever. That kind of self-possession is scarce these days. Yet, there it was. Sylvester Stallone, sitting across from Samantha B. under the bright studio lights, steady and unfazed, offering the world something it didn't realize it had been longing for, unfiltered presence. After the interview, Stallone didn't post anything. No retweets, no back and forths, no follow-ups. He slipped back into his usual rhythm, allowing the media waves to crash and recede on their own. But even as the buzz churned, something about his words lingered in the air like the scent of something familiar and comforting. Conversations kept circling around one simple, persistent question. Why did this resonate so deeply? The answer was never complicated. He stepped into a space that had already been carefully staged and rehearsed, and with almost unnerving calm, he gently pushed the whole scene off its axis. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he stood firm in his truth, not with ego, but with a quiet kind of assurance that only comes from years of living it. His authenticity wasn't polished for the camera. It wasn't packaged for approval. And that's what made it so compelling. Long after the clip stopped making the rounds online, after the trending tags disappeared and the headlines moved on to the next sensation, what remained wasn't a soundbite. It was the silence he left behind, the dignity of a man who didn't feel the need to prove anything. He didn't walk off that set transformed or reinvented. He left as the same person who had walked in, weathered, grounded, and unmistakably himself. And that, more than anything else, is what caught people off guard. In an age where conversations, both online and off, often feel sanitized and manufactured, where every word seems to run through a dozen filters of strategy and fear, Stallone broke through the noise by not playing the game. He didn't smile for the brand. He didn't tailor his words to fit the moment. He didn't ask for applause. He simply spoke what was real for him, and did it without apology or flourish. People noticed that. Even those who didn't agree with him found themselves quietly respecting the clarity of his conviction. Because sincerity has become a rare currency. And when you see it, not the rehearsed version, but the real thing, you pause, you take it in, and you remember it. Thank you for spending these few minutes with us. If Stallone's quiet resolve reminded you of something deeper, something we've been missing in the noise, you're not alone. Moments like that don't scream for attention, yet they stay with us because they reveal who someone truly is. If this story moved you or made you think differently about what it means to be strong, then share it with someone who could use that reminder today. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next story that speaks not just to the headlines, but to the heart. And tell us in the comments, when was the last time you stood your ground with grace? We'd love to hear your story. Until next time, take care, and remember, character is what endures. All stories on this channel are fictional and for entertainment only. We believe in equal rights for all and aim to share messages of kindness, fairness, and dignity. Any similarities to real people or events are purely coincidental. These stories are free of political or religious intent and are designed to inspire, not to reflect or represent real-world entities.